To today's webinar on partnership brokering and shared value. Our specific focus today is where business is pursuing a shared value business strategy, how can it best work with others in partnerships to do that? We know that companies around the world are implementing a shared value approach to business strategy, where products, services and processes support social impact as well as profit. However, these initiatives usually require the expertise, experience and networks of others outside of business, of government and civil society. And so really, to get the deepest impact, shared value strategies need to integrate partnerships. So how can organisations create and sustain effective shared value partnerships? Now, we thought that was a great topic for conversation between FSG, who convenes the Shared Value Initiative, and Partnership Brokers Association, who really specialise in what it takes to make partnerships for social impact successful. So my name is Michelle Halse, and I'm delighted to just be hosting this webinar for you today. I lead the work for Partnership Brokers Association on building our global alumni. And co-hosting with me is Marta Serafin, who is PBA's Association Coordinator. And sadly, missing from our call today is our colleague who's on maternity leave. So not so sadly, actually, but Joanna Perez, who was also part of initiating this webinar. And she leads PBA's work connecting with other change practitioners. So we acknowledge her today, but she's not with us today. So as many of you know already, PBA's mission is to build capacity for more professional and effective brokering of multi-stakeholder collaboration, especially for an equitable and sustainable world. And as part of our commitment to our growing global alumni, and to this wider inquiry into effective collaboration, and through that PBA's work connecting with other change practitioner networks, we're very pleased to host this webinar with FSG and to particularly have Adeeb Mahmud join us on the line with some of his colleagues as well. FSG is a mission-driven consulting firm that provides shared value services and research and supports the Shared Value Initiative. You may also know of their work creating and sharing the collective impact approach to place-based systems change. That's not our topic today, but it very well could be the topic of a future webinar, so watch this space. There are many connections between PBA and partnership brokers around the world and FSG, but it was particularly the connection between Jocelyne Daw, one of our PBA associates based in Canada, and Justin Backley, who's the former executive director of the Shared Value Initiative, which enabled us to kick off a conversation to arrange this collaborative webinar and explore the deep overlapping perspectives between these two methodologies and practices. So I'm very pleased to have my fellow PBA associates, Jocelyne Daw and Julie Mundy, to join us alongside Adeeb. So both Jocelyne and Julie represent PBA and will be sharing with us some perspectives and case studies of the interconnections between partnership brokering and shared value. So all three presenters today are really working at the heart of business partnerships for social impact, and they'll help us explore case studies on how partnership brokering can be really critical for effective shared value business strategies. So that's just our introduction. We'll hear first from Adeeb, then Jocelyne, then Julie, and then we'll devote the second half of the hour and the conversation to questions, rather than take questions throughout, just to carefully manage our time and make sure we're contained within the hour. But please do use the chat, as I mentioned earlier, to direct questions while you think of them. if you could send them to Jocelyne Daw rather than to everyone, that will be less distracting. Or else save up your questions later and we'll let you have a chance to unmute yourself and join in the conversation directly. So, without any further ado, let me introduce our first guest, Adeeb Mahmud, who is, I believe, General Manager for FSG. He has a few other things to share to introduce a little more about his experience, but he's going to help us understand the concept of shared value and the links to partnerships, including some of the challenges that organisations face going down this path. So welcome, Adeeb. It's been lovely to meet you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Over to you.
Thank you much, Michelle. Is my volume sound coming through okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you to PBA, and it's exciting to have so many colleagues engaged in partnership join this webinar. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all of you who are joining from all over the world. Excited to engage in what I hope will be not a presentation, but a dialogue with you about shared value and partnerships. What I'd like to do as I get started is to start off very quickly sharing a little bit about FSG and myself. So as Michelle started to mention, FSG is a social impact consulting and research organization. We are also a nonprofit organization aligned with our mission of creating social change. We were founded in 2000 by Michael Porter and Harvard Business School and Mark Kramer. And we engage in strategic planning, evaluation, research, and in hosting communities of practice. And our work spans a number of issue areas, including health, development, and environment. And shared value is one of the areas that we work with, not only with corporations, which is a big focus area for us, but also we engage in our work with foundations, nonprofits, and governments. We're about 140 people across 6 offices. About myself, I have been at FSG for about 12 years now. I'm a managing director based in our Washington, D.C. office. I lead our DC office and our global development practice area. And I've spent a lot of my time at this intersection of for-profit and non-profit. So I've had an opportunity to work with companies like Merck and Abbott and Dow Chemical. Have also had an opportunity to work with organizations like Save the Children and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And a lot of my energy I spend thinking about how do you really create effective partnerships between these different sectors, because we know that the challenges of today cannot be solved by one sector, let alone one organization. And so I'm happy to share some of our thoughts as it relates to shared value and shared value partnerships in our conversation today. I'm going to share, I'll try to keep slides to a minimum, but I do want to share a couple of slides as we're talking just to orient you a little bit better. But before I do that, if you Google shared value and partnerships, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of sites come up. And some of them are from FSG and from the Shared Value Initiative that we host. But there's websites like Devex and Triple Pundit and The Guardian and Coca-Cola that'll come up if you do that search. So I don't in any way mean to suggest that I or FSG is the authority when it comes to shared value or shared value partnerships, but we believe very strongly in the power of businesses to create positive social change. And so my conversations today are based on some of the trends and that we've seen and the conversations we've had. But I come into this conversation, recognizing the power of the experiences and the expertise and the insights that you all bring. Part of the reason why we engage in these conversations is to really question our own assumptions and to really be challenged and expand our own horizons and knowledge in talking to practitioners like you. So I really invite you to engage all of us today in that spirit. So let me talk about shared value and how we think about it. Michelle, is that working, the slide? Okay, hopefully you all can see it.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So when Michael Porter and Mark Kramer wrote the first article on shared value in Harvard Business Review about 6 or so years ago, they defined shared value as business models that increase profits or reduce costs or enhance competitiveness by solving social problems. I think that definition is really important. Making a company more successful, but doing so by solving a social problem. And what's inherent in that business model is that shared value initiatives or strategies are not about philanthropy or doing good. Those are extremely important and companies will always do those. But shared value business models by definition are part of core business. And the analysis, the intentionality, the investments that go into shared value business models or initiatives should be very similar or the same as other business initiatives. And because they are core to the business, they are able to attract a different type of attention, investment, resources that they would if the, like other business investments, like launching a new product or creating a new factory. And so this idea of creating economic value for the companies is key to shared value. And along with that comes the idea of harnessing innovation. So if you look at this graphic on the left, this cycle is really important because shared value is built on the premise that when the company understands why solving the social problem is important for their business, they are much more likely to invest in that initiative. So an example of, I'll go back to the video now. An example of shared value initiative is a company like Discovery Health that has invested in the health of its clients. And by doing so, it has seen a 30% reduction in hospitalization costs, and the participants in their Vitality program live 13 to 21 years more. So you can see how there is a clear benefit to the company in investing in the health of their clients. Share value initiatives can, we believe, be accelerated by the work of different types of partners. And I won't go through all of the different types of partners. However, if you think about international or local nonprofit organizations, they can provide intelligence about new markets, or they can assist in service delivery. The role of international donors like the Rockefeller Foundation in helping to launch pilots or bringing partners together. Governments can play a critical role. For example, if you think about what DFAT has done in terms of signaling why shared value is so important to the Australian government, and there's a very powerful role that governments can play. There are think tanks and policy organizations, there are advisory firms like FSG, and then an important constituent for a company are other companies, peer companies, and partnering with them and creating shared value. So we believe that those are all important ways in which partners can help accelerate shared value. I want to be conscious of the time, so I want to mention a couple of key challenges that we see in partnering. First of all, what I often find is that the starting point for companies and let's say NGOs who I've spent a lot of time working with can often be different. The motivations, as we all know, are different. The implicit motivations are not always made explicit. And if they're not made explicit at the very beginning, more often than not, they cause some tension, unnecessary tension down the line. Languages are often different. When a company says sustainability, what does that mean to an NGO? When an NGO says impact, what does that mean to a company? And I think we as partnership facilitators and brokers can play a strong role in creating better common language. And the last one we'll say is about incentives. This is both about individual, but it's also about organizational incentives. And you can align incentives, but again, you have to be explicit and intentional about that from the beginning, because otherwise each party will make some assumptions about the other party, which may or may not be correct. And usually it becomes, if you're 6 months down the road, to then align incentives becomes very difficult. So I will stop there, and Michelle will hand it back to you. Happy to engage in the Q&A.
Thank you, Adeeb, very much. And of course, our time is going to race away because there's 1,000 things I'm sure that you would have liked to share more. But thank you, firstly, for just the clarity of that definition. Right? That already just sort of unlocked something in my understanding. The point of the word by, right? So becoming more successful by solving social problems. Great. That just was really helpful to unpack the sort of drivers of it. So that was helpful. And then the challenges, they will be things I'm sure that our partnership broker audience recognise, and I'm sure we'll want to follow up with you some strategies for addressing those. But we'll move on firstly, before that, to our next speaker, Jocelyne Daw, who is based in Canada and a recognised innovator and change maker in the evolution of authentic multiple sector partnerships, very often involving business, and also in integrating collective action, community engagement, social innovation for social change. Jocelyne has worked across all sectors and been deeply involved with business and shared value initiatives. She's an associate and practitioner trainer for PBA and also a certified shared value consultant. So Jocelyne really knows both sides of this conversation and has been also a member of the Global Shared Value Advisory Committee from 2013 to 16. So it's really great, Jocelyne, that we've got you in our inner circle and willing to share with us a few thoughts today, especially to add to Adeeb's comments about shared value, what is that, but also a few key concepts around partnership brokering, but then the linkages that you've seen with shared value initiatives. So over to you, Jocelyne, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Can everybody hear me okay? Michelle, can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks so much. And I really appreciated Adeeb's presentation. And then I love the fact that you ended up talking about some of the challenges because, you know, having had the experience of working on both sides of the equation where I've worked with business, helping them look at how they might create shared value initiatives, and then also being involved in the partnership space. One of the biggest things that I would say I've learned or experienced is that when companies are working on shared value, you know, my experience is that partnerships don't just accelerate, they're actually absolutely central to creating shared value initiatives and making them successful. Because as you mentioned, when you're looking at using the power of business to address social issues, business does not have the kind of depth of experience and understanding of some of the social issues, which is absolutely understandable. What they bring is their understanding of business processes, development of products, services, and they can bring, of course, a lot of assets and resources to work with organizations to really create some shared value initiatives. So I see partnerships as absolutely critical to shared value. But I think as you finished talking about that work, the thing about working in partnership is that it is very hard work. And just because people want to partner does not necessarily mean they know how to do that effectively. And our experience at the partnership brokers is that the how is often the what that people want to do is often motherhood and apple pie. It's so hard to disagree with wanting to address social issues and using an innovative approach in terms of having the power of business be part of trying to address those social issues. But then actually taking the time to figure out how do you partner effectively when, as you mentioned, you're working across different cultures, different languages, different ways of working. So most businesses, and in all fairness, other sides of the equation as well, nonprofits, even government, have a lot of experience with the traditional kind of charity model, which is very much what I would call on the transactional approach to working together. You know, but when you're taking that sort of bigger idea and really trying to address a social issue at scale, you're looking at more systems change, you're looking at multiple players in order to be able to make that successful. Focusing on the project is not enough. you have to spend the time really thinking about how you're going to work effectively together, because partnerships don't just happen. And I think one of the things for me about being involved in the partnership brokers that I so appreciated was that our founder spent time really after 10 years working in multiple partnerships, many with businesses around the world, took a step back and said, you know, what is it that makes partnerships work? And seeing ones that partnerships between business and the community and government that she thought would be so successful and weren't, and wondering why. And what she really boiled down to in terms of the essence of it was that the successful partnerships actually paid attention not just to the project, they paid attention to the partnership and the partnership process, how they were working together, not just what they were doing. Because that is really sort of the important thing. And then really looking at taking the time when you're stepping back and saying, okay, how do we do this differently? How are we going to work effectively? And a lot of it starts with spending time really defining what you mean by the word partnership. I think most people, and it's actually a word that is so overused around the world. I don't know how many people who are maybe just a funding relationship talk about their relationship as partnerships, when in fact, really, they're just funding relationships. So one of the most important things to do is to really, with intentionality, understand what does that actually mean to partner? And so we use the Oxford English Dictionary definition of ongoing working relationship where risks and rewards are shared. So often businesses don't necessarily want to share risks. Nonprofits don't want to share risks. There's a lack of understanding about what that really means. So taking the time to really define what that word means is so important. And then, you know, having a common vision. But I really appreciated, Adeeb, that you mentioned the fact that you also have to understand that partners are there for not just the common goal, they have their own individual interests as well. And you have to spend time really understanding what those interests are if you're going to be able to advance the work together. So just finishing up the importance of intentionality, you had a wonderful cycle for your shared value initiative. And we have a partnership cycle, which really parallels the project cycle, but really looks at it from the point of view of the partners and the partnership relationship and how you manage that so that the partnership works effectively and that will drive forward the project. Without that, it won't happen. So intentionality is key, having frameworks and understanding, as you pointed out, that there's art as well as science in doing this kind of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyne. You packed a lot into a few minutes there, and I know it's only because of your deep, deep experience that you can do that and synthesize so much into a very few short remarks. But as we reflect on that into our questions, I'm sure there'll be some follow-up, so thank you very much. Let me just turn to our third and final speaker before we have some questions, and this is Julie Mundy. And Julie is, like me, based in Melbourne in Australia. I was just looking out the window where it's a very crisp spring morning today, surprisingly cool, but beautiful. So Julie's just down the road. But Julie is a very highly experienced and very well-known independent partnership broker around the world, and particularly deeply here in Australia. But we're also fortunate that Julie is the Director of Training and Regional Development for the Partnership Brokers Association. And he's been doing this work within international development for more than 20 years and worked across many, many diverse and complex multi-stakeholder partnerships, both in Australia across and deeply across Asia. And in relation to this topic, Julie's been the partnerships advisor to the Australian government's business partnerships platform. How's that for a mouthful? Which is in itself a shared value initiative. So once again, it's been a beautiful example of bringing Julie's deep partnership brokering mindset, experience and frameworks to a very intentional partnership-focused shared value initiative. So we've invited Julie to share a little about that case study specifically, and some of the lessons that are emerging out of that. So thanks, Julie.
Very much, Michelle, and hi everyone at various time zones around the world. I see a few familiar faces, which is lovely to see. Also just recognising Michelle Cheers on the phone, who's one of the partnership brokers on the business partnerships platform as well. So for those of you who don't know about it, firstly, if you just Google BPP and DFAT, which stands for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, it will take you to the website, which will tell you a lot more about the initiative itself. But just very quickly, it was basically DFAT had decided that it wanted to be very intentional, something that Jocelyne just mentioned, about how it might engage the private sector to help it achieve its development objectives overseas. And I think this is really the first time that it had been done so consciously. And DFAT did invest quite a considerable amount of time and effort in trying to understand what it was the private sector would be interested in engaging with DFAT. And contrary to what they expected, which is that it would be about funding, it wasn't, in fact. It was more about the Australian government's convening, brokering and influencing abilities in the countries that they worked. It was also about the deep knowledge and networks that the Australian government was able to bring to businesses, particularly in political and regulatory spaces. And it was also about its ability to create a more enabling environment for business in terms of policy engagement. And so the shared value partnership was quite interesting for a government engagement because from a funding perspective, it only commits to funding up to 50% of the engagement, and the value, the balance of the value in both in-kind and financial contributions comes from the remaining partners. And in most cases, the partnerships are multi-stakeholder in that they're often engaging with NGOs as well as the private sector, and sometimes also with local government. And because everybody has some skin in the game, as it were, it's been a very interesting experience in terms of changing the power dynamics that we typically see in partnerships where you have one major investor. And it's really changed the balance of the dialogue in terms of an investor genuinely listening to partners. So it's been a really interesting experience. They're just coming up into the third round of engagement. So there's about 20 different partnerships around the world, all relatively small scale. So all of them are around the $500,000 to $1 million mark, which is fairly similar to Canadian dollars and a little less than US dollars. And they're very intentionally set up to really give partners an opportunity to see if they can partner together effectively. They're funded for a very short period of time, between 12 and 24 months. And the idea is that at the end of that period, having established whether or not they can partner successfully together, that the initiatives will often go forward with or without DFAT engagement. And so in some ways it's a catalyst fund. It's really giving people the opportunity to suck it and see, as we might say in Australia. There's been some really interesting examples in terms of what we've done from the partnership aspect. So, you know, typically there'd be a call for funding, people would get a consortium together, and off they'd go and run this particular project. In this approach, we've deliberately applied the PBA framework, or a modification of that, which says, well, let's invest some time in the scoping and building of these partnerships to see how they're going to engage together. And we have a partnership agreement discussion right at the get-go to work through who's going to be doing what are the principles that are going to inform the engagement, what are the reporting, what are, if any, are the non-negotiables, what's the risk framework, for example, for how we're going forward, how we're going to communicate together, what are the governance structures, and they're unique to each particular partnership. And I think that's key, that there isn't one size fits all, because every partnership is very, its needs are very specific. And so a broker is involved, a partnership broker is involved in helping to establish those agreements, and then off we go into the partnership. I'm really conscious that I'm running out of time. I was going to share a couple of examples for you, but just very quickly, I guess where some of the lessons that we've learned from the engagement is that firstly, partnerships are not set and forget. So just because we do an agreement at the start doesn't mean that everything's going to run smoothly. And what we have to do is watch out for moments when brokering can actually help facilitate and progress partnerships, and not to let those go on too long. So we really want to see a preventative approach. We've learnt that at cost in some of the early partnerships, where we probably let some challenges go on too long. And when we finally got involved with the partnership broker, we were able to help them get back on track quite quickly. It does take time to establish good partnerships, and it's key to have the right people at the table. And, you know, we can't negotiate a partnership in Australia that's going to happen in Afghanistan, for example. So having the right people involved is key, and having those people involved who want to collaborate, who've got the right attitude, the right mindset, has also been fundamental to successful partnerships. Partnership due diligence is really key, and that's well beyond financial due diligence. So again, that's looking at other systems fit for purpose for partnering. That's been a big challenge for DFAT. It's how you talk the walk of equity, and then you slap, you know, a contracting situation, which is not equitable. And so we've had to do a lot of work around that, about trying to build equity and partnership principles into contracts. It's key to also recognise that the learnings are really 2 and 3 way. So just as much as there's been fantastic learnings from the private sector into the NGO sector, but equally the learnings have run the opposite way as well, and the private sector has really benefited from that engagement. Just really finally, we've really seen that values and principles can really either founder or progress partnerships, and that often partnerships that have struggled have really come back to principles in terms of ensuring that the partnerships keep on track. And just finally, that issue around systems that Adeeb mentioned, systems can be a real blocker in good partnerships. And I think unless organisations are prepared to address how the systems enable or disable partnerships, they're just not going to be sustainable. That was too much in too little time, but I hope it got some people thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, that's excellent, Julie. And I know you wanted to talk to us specifically about some ecotourism in Nepal and some another example in Vietnam, particularly with some conflict going on. So I know there's deep, deep stories that could bubble up. Perhaps they'll come out in response to some questions. I'm also contemplating our next webinar might be 90 minutes if people can cope with that, because it might just allow a little more spaciousness in the conversation. But thanks, Julie and Jocelyne and Adeeb, for giving us a snapshot that obviously speaks to deep iceberg underneath. So we are going to devote the rest of our time to a conversation. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 ways you can submit a question, and one is in writing to Jocelyne Daw through the chat, and the other is by raising your hand, which you also, there's a button in the participants icon. If you click on that, you'll see a range of buttons: raise hand, yes, no, da 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 da, and that will be evident to us that you would like to turn yourself off mute and ask a question. So I might flick first to Jocelyne and see if there have been some questions come through, Jocelyne, that perhaps you might want to throw one out there, and we'll see who's best placed to answer that for us.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. We've had a couple of questions around a similar theme that relates to, you know, what's the difference between companies that might work in partnership with a nonprofit, for example, to address an issue versus a partnership that relates specifically to shared value. So I don't know if that's one that perhaps Adeeb could start with.
Good idea. Adeeb, we throw that one at you? How would you distinguish between these slightly different models of partnership, or perhaps drivers? Over to you.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So I think there are two dimensions that we should talk about it that's embedded in this question. One is, I would say, the nature, if you will, of the partnership, and the other dimension is about where the company is coming from, the company's motivation, if you will. When I think about whether it's a shared value partnership or not, I think about that second question, meaning, is this something that the senior leadership, the CEO, has taken on as a key driver of growth? When the CEO is thinking about where profitability is coming from, is she thinking about this initiative as something that's key, either in terms of profitability or in terms of risk reduction or cost reduction? It could be both, but any of those. And has there been enough analysis gone in to model this out and think about how this will contribute to the bottom line, and how, again, solving a social problem will lead to that profitability? So that's one dimension that I would use to think about. Does this feel like it is a corporate responsibility initiative or a shared value initiative? Again, no judgment in terms of better or worse, but they are different. And then the second dimension is about the nature of partnerships, which is, I think, goes back to something Jocelyne was saying. Some companies might write a check to an organization and say, hey, we're engaged in a partnership. Now, we can get into a debate about whether that's a partnership or not, but I think we would all agree that when you engage in ways that are more substantive, more back and forth, when the power dynamic is more equal, those can be harder, but they are probably more effective as partnerships. And so I think to answer that question, whether it's a shared value partnership or not would in my mind be dependent on the motivation of the company and where it's coming from. And you can engage in, I think, equally valuable high impact partnerships that are corporate responsibility and philanthropic partnerships that are not shared value partnerships.
Thank you very much, Adeeb. I think we might leave that there and jump to another question. I'm going to ask Marta if anyone has raised their hand and give someone a...
Not yet.
No one brave enough yet.
No.
Come on. We'd love to have you join us with your voice and your face. So please don't be afraid. Did I explain how to do it? So you click on the partnerships icon down the bottom, participants, where you will see the list of names of everyone who's on the call, and you will see a little button with a hand. And if you click that, we'll know that that's your way of saying, I'd really like the chance to ask a question.
So we have a question from Michelle.
Okay.
Michelle. Yeah. So I've unmuted Michelle. Yeah, Michelle's
Lovely.
on the phone. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks very much for the presentation, everyone. It's great to listen to all the wealth of experience. And as Julie Mundy mentioned, it's particularly something that I'm really interested in, giving the business partnership platforms and partnership brokering that I've been doing with corporate partners. I guess one of the questions I had and was going to put to the group was, what are the most effective frameworks or approaches that organisations have used to be able to actually measure the impact and the contribution that they're making to the social and economic outcomes? So a lot of the cases, it's a new approach, and they are needing to also prove the value of the partnership or the shared value approach in itself. I'm wondering if anyone had any experience in how some of that impact measurement operates.
Thanks, Michelle. I was thinking I might throw to Jocelyne, but Julie's putting her hand up. So Julie, Jocelyne, do you want to say something first? I was just doing that because Michelle and Julie's work overlaps a bit, and I thought maybe perspective.
You go first, Julie, and I'll take.
Thanks, Julie.
Just very quickly, I was just going to point people to one of the private sector organisations that's involved in the BPP, which is Intrepid Travel. And they've just published their last annual report, which you can download off their website, which is entirely based from a shared value perspective. They've changed their entire company reporting structure, and people might just find that a really interesting example to have a look at.
Lovely, thank you. We might include a link to that in our follow-up comms as well. That could be interesting. Jocelyne, did you have something to add?
Well, I don't mean to make this seem like it's a promotion, but you know, we have some colleagues at the Partnership Brokers Association who worked based out of the Netherlands, who've worked with a group of partnership brokers around the world looking at how do we measure and evaluate. So not just, you know, measuring it in terms of the impact, but also evaluating what's working, what isn't, but also trying to understand what has been the value add. Has it, you know, has the fact that it was a partnership made it the results stronger and the outcome stronger? So it's called the Partnership Learning Loop. You can find that online. And I just recently used that methodology for a partnership that I was doing some evaluation on to, that was about it was about creating a social enterprise. Using the power of partnership. So while it wasn't a direct business, it was absolutely with the idea of driving profit as well as social good. So that was one that I found really helpful. I think always the challenge when you're evaluating or measuring is, you know, can you, you know, a lot of people want to be able to say, you know, take attribution, we made this happen, when in fact so often it's very difficult. There's so many different factors that play a role. You have to look at it from a contribution point of view. But I do feel it's really valuable because I think when you start to understand, you know, how being in partnership has added value, it gives you a chance to be more ambitious with your partnerships in terms of let's look beyond the project and look at what other ways in which we can bring value to the organizations and the community.
Thanks, Jocelyne. I have some of the framework that the Partnership Learning Loop uses to look into measuring partnerships, which Michelle and others might find interesting, but some of it is about the setup and the design, and both Jocelyne and Julie and Adeeb have talked about the upfront stuff being so critical, but then taking the time to look back at what worked well there, what was clearly built, what wasn't, what systems were put in place, you know, what proved to be challenging. But then the daily operations of a partnership, as well as those collaborative mindsets and skills that Julie mentioned as well. And then what specific to the project, the results that are being sought. But then this, you've all mentioned this added value piece, is if this is not delved into, I think we really miss half the story of partnerships. So not just what were we hoping and knew we could look into and measure, but then what more happened and what unexpected value did we discover from the partnership. So making sure there's scope in your measurement framework to look for the unexpected as well. Now, Marta tells me there is someone else brave enough to put their hand up. Who's that, Marta? Who can we have?
Yes, we actually have two people who would like to ask questions. We have Marilyn, so I'm going to unmute Marilyn now.
Lovely. Thanks, Marilyn.
Hello, this has been wonderful so far. Thank you very much for arranging this. So my experience most recently is coming from being an internal broker, hidden under the guise of fundraising in the not-for-profit sector. Lesson learned, never go there again. Working on some absolutely fascinating and really important partnerships cross-sector between the corporate sector and NGOs. And really loving the partnership brokers model, trying for the last number of years to integrate that with shared values. So I'm super excited to hear that, Jocelyne, you're doing that. It's amazing. Getting those upfront partnership discussions in place, watching people get incredibly energized and clear about goals. And then I would say on average 9, 10, 11 months into the partnership, the not-for-profit is getting close to the end of its fiscal year end, and all of a sudden the viciousness starts about, you know, we need money. We're a non-profit. We can't afford to partner. We're here for the people that we serve. And I have found that they get so locked into that mindset that it risks throwing the partnership overboard. We did a recent one in a very important field of mental health, and it almost tipped the partnership. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any suggestions or experiences in terms of how do you help that not-for-profit partner re-engage as a true partner. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if I might throw to Adeeb and see if, from your perspective, Adeeb, working with foundations and not-for-profits, but especially from this angle of shared value, whether there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a few words about that. I completely agree with what you were asking in the question. And I will often see almost two sides of the coin, if you will. On the one hand, absolutely, see the trend you're talking about, which is many times nonprofits, urged on by their boards, will want to engage in shared value partnerships as a way to either increase their revenues or diversify their revenues. And when I'm talking to executives at nonprofits, but even more so when I have an opportunity to engage boards, one of the messages that I always try to convey at the very beginning is, look, if you are trying to engage with companies in shared value partnerships for the money, for the revenue, that is the wrong starting point. Will shared value partnerships help you increase your revenues? It very well may. Will it help you diversify because you just get government funds right now? It certainly might, but that can be your first reason. If that's your first reason, then guess what? You're going to be going after the companies who you think will write you the biggest check. And that will not necessarily guarantee you impact. If you're a nonprofit, you exist to create social impact. So your first criteria has to be, who's a company who I partner with who has some type of an asset that I don't, or who can somehow help me scale the impact that I can't with just government funding, or will bring a different type of insight than DFAT brings, or USAID brings, or the Rockefeller Foundation brings. Those are the rationale, the reasonings that they have to engage in. And so I think having that conversation with nonprofit leadership is really important so that they're clear on why they want to do shared value partnerships. But the flip side is that I also see a lot of corporations expecting that a nonprofit organization will simply continue to engage in partnership discussions for month after month without getting any revenues. And that is unrealistic, right? If let's say that it's a large multinational, if they were engaging with one of their suppliers, a for-profit company, they would never expect that supplier to just continue to talk with them for 6 months without any expectation or actually getting, real revenues. And so I think that expectation also needs to be revised during initial conversations. And again, whatever we can do to help companies understand that, you actually need to value the time that nonprofits provide. It's not that once they start delivering the service is when they need to be paid. They need to be paid for the time investment that their executives and their people are putting in as well. So I would say pushing on both of those fronts is what I've been trying to do. It's not easy to change mindsets, but those are my thoughts.
Thanks, that's really, really valuable. And getting down to fundamentals, it's really about stepping outside your own world and bubble and worldview and really developing a deeper empathy and understanding for the perspective of the other, right? And looking at what expectations you place on them from their perspective as you embark on the ways that you're going to work together. So thanks. I think Julie wanted to just add to that response, and then we might look for another question. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle and Adeeb. I just wanted to add to that. I think what's really critical both at the start of a potential collaboration, but also as you go through, is to be really clear about what your individual objectives are, what it is that for your organisation, what you hope to get out of it. So, Marilyn, to your question is really from the get-go, talking to those not-for-profits, to clarify, is it just funding that we're after? Because to me, that's perhaps not a collaboration. what else are you hoping to get out of it? What's in it for you? So often, I think in collaborations, we really focus in very heavily on what's the shared objective, what's, you know, what it is we're aiming to achieve together. But if we don't acknowledge and recognise what the individual objectives are, often what you'll find is that that engagement falls off because there's just not enough in it for people to keep engaged, or for their bosses to back them in terms of, you know, turning up to meetings or pulling in the additional resources. And I also think that, you know, perhaps at a health check that you might do on a fairly regular basis is you'd be checking in to see if those objectives still remain valid, or if there's other things that they need out of it. Have things changed? Are there increasing resource constraints, which meant that, you know, maybe the basis on which they engaged has changed? Because I think one of the key things we know about partnerships is that, you know, they're not static. And I think, for, you know, one of the things that brokers will often do is ensure that throughout the partnership, you know, people are being held to account. We have the opportunity to check in to make sure that the partnership is still relevant and still delivering. And that can be some of the things that can help address that disengagement that you often see, I think, midway through the partnering cycle. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Marilyn, for your question. Jocelyne, do we have any more written questions coming through?
Yes, we do. So here is one from a Canadian. For shared value initiatives, and what is it that companies need to do to overcome some of the skepticism from community and even government partners that there is true interest in going beyond just whitewashing or greenwashing to get more profit or more customers?
Great. I think that's got Adeeb's name written all over it. What do you think?
I can talk quickly. So I do hear sometimes corporations feeling nervous about, okay, I hear what you're saying. I get that this is about solving social problems, you know, and we're going to be more profitable by doing that. But if I go out to the community or to the government partner and say that, hey, I'm trying to make money, you know, they'll think I'm trying to do it off the back of, you know, low-income individuals. What is that going to do to my perception? My feeling is, and what I have seen and heard, is that more and more nonprofit and government, not all, but many, are becoming much more nuanced and sophisticated in their thinking, meaning that they accept that companies exist to make profit, that if Microsoft was not profitable, we would never have the Gates Foundation and the great work that the foundation is doing. If companies didn't pay taxes, no governments would have the resources that they do. And so as long as companies are authentic, upfront, and genuine in saying what they're trying to do, most, again, not all, there are still lots of skeptics in civil society, but many nonprofit and government actors will say, okay, I get it, you're being upfront with us. Yes, you know, you've got a product opportunity here, or you know, you're trying to understand a new market segment. If that aligns with our mission, we will engage with you. That doesn't let NGOs off the hook, by the way. You know, the powerful advocacy role that organizations like Oxfam have played for years in making sure companies are at check, that they're not, you know, polluting the river, or they're not violating labor laws. I think that role still needs to stay. That can't go away. But that's my feeling, is that I see more and more civil society and governments recognizing, again, if the company is genuine, that yes, this is the new paradigm for development.
Jocelyne,
yeah,
do you want to?
Yeah, because I think it's such an important question, and I think you said it a couple of times using the word genuine, authentic, and I would start with one of the sort of core principles of building successful partnerships is trust. And trust is something that is built up over time based on, you know, people being open with each other, being honest, being, you know, delivering, doing what they say they're going to do. So I think trust is something that's a critical part of building partnerships in general, but more so almost in shared value, because there's that additional profit motivation. And then the second thing I would add, which is another core principle of the partnership brokers, is this whole idea of equity. so that nonprofits genuinely feel that they're being heard, that their perspective and the way they're thinking about it is being respected, being listened to, because that is going to be critical. So, you know, it really goes back to how you build the partnerships. And you can talk all you want about, oh, we're genuine, we really want to do that. But nothing will happen unless you actually live those values, really bring them to life, and build that kind of foundation of trust. And that, you know, we also talk about win-win, so it's not just one-sided, diversity, but in the end, it takes a lot of courage to try to do these new things.
That actually feels almost like a lovely closing remark, Jocelyne. But I was just going to, keeping an eye on the clock, we're nearly to the hour, but I wanted to give our three speakers just a chance to make a very quick final reflection or very quick comment, like, you know, 20, 30 seconds sort of thing. Jocelyne, if you have something else you'd like to say, that's fine too, but perhaps we'll go in the order that you were speaking, and Adeeb, see if, is there just something as a result of having had this hour together and hearing about this, you know, substantial intersection between the work of shared value and the approach of shared value and all the underpinning principles and practices of partnership brokering. Yeah, just any new insight or reflection that's come up for you from our conversation.
It was heartening for me to see, you know, almost 50 people across the globe join this. And so I feel really privileged. I really want to thank PBA, Michelle, and your colleagues for making this happen. And thank you to everyone who joined for giving me this opportunity to engage with you. I'm really glad that we are deepening our relationship with PBA, talking about partnerships in action. And I feel like, you know, there's more that our two organizations can do together. But the work that you do, all of you who have joined as partnership brokers and facilitators, it is difficult, but it is really important and it is inspiring. So thank you for the work that you do and for giving me this time.
Thanks. Thank you, Adeeb. Jocelyne, did you have anything other than your comment on courage, which was a great wrap up?
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things that actually answers one of the questions that was being asked, which was, you know, I think we all talked about the importance of intentionality, that these kind of new ideas like shared value, which I think have got a lot of positives, that we need to start thinking and doing differently, but we need to do it with intentionality and to really put the focus on not just the project, but also the relationships that are going to be critical to driving them forward. But, you know, I love what you said, you can't just set and forget. The partnership piece is the critical piece to making anything work. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Jocelyne. And Julie, any quick reflection as a result of our conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And for me too, it's been very exciting seeing everybody at various time zones all around the world. So thanks for making the effort to join. I guess my final thought is that partnerships don't just happen just because we call it a partnership or a shared value collaboration. Doesn't mean it's just going to happen. And just echoing Jocelyne's comment about intentionality or being purposeful, and about thinking about the process of partnerships, and, you know, because they provide a framework within which really great things can happen. And it does take a little bit of time and attention, but it's worth it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also just struck by, I guess, the sense of opportunity, right? That the reality of shared value having emerged into the world, with kind of business having a new degree of insight around the potential of working on things the world needs, you know, that's good for them and it's good for the world. And that just therein lies great potential. And if we do it well, right, if we invest in all this insight and intelligence that we already have about what it really takes, then then there's wonderful potential there for our world. So that's kind of what I'm left with. So I want to just bring this to a close, because we try to make this, you know, really stick to the time. I know people will be dropping off. So just an enormous thank you to Adeeb and to Jocelyne Daw and to Julie Mundy for sharing your insights with us on the call. PBA is really keen to create opportunities like this for our global network to come together and feel like we're growing as a community while being very dispersed, but also learning together and stimulating our thinking about the use of our own methodologies, but in conjunction with frameworks and methodologies that other collaboration, change networks are using. So this webinar has been part of working on that. And just to channel Joanna Perez, our leader on these change initiatives, she would want to talk about how important it is for those of us working on constructive collaboration for peace and sustainability in the world, that we're able to connect to others who also share those intentions, and that we can hold and work together towards a bigger vision around peace and justice and equity in our world, and activate this global field to recognise a bigger, wider field of global practice and practitioners, learn from each other, challenge each other, ask difficult questions, and ultimately be driving up the quality and reach of our collective efforts of powerful collaboration for a better world. So that's the context in which we reach out for this kind of dialogue with you, Adeeb, and with FSG and with others. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. Your comments and questions have really helped make this interesting, thought-provoking. As I said, in a few days, we'll be sending a link to this recording and some other material on today's call. If you'd like to find out more, you can look up fsg.org or sharedvalue.org, and also partnershipbrokers.org. We're all .orgs. And you can find out more about all of our organisations there, including the upcoming Partnership Brokers trainings that in Wellington, Amsterdam and Bangkok before the year ends, and then there'll be a whole fresh program again for the new year, including Adeeb in Canada, where you're invited. So thanks everyone again, a huge big thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next one. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. See you in Vancouver.
Thanks. Bye.
Marta,